have a wonderful guest speaker with us. David Shelley comes to us from UNC. He is the International Students Ministry Leader Director over at UNC, and he's going to be with us for a couple of weeks. Go ahead and come on up, David. We'd love to just have you be a part of our church for the next couple of weeks, and he's going to share with us. So please give a warm welcome to David Shelley.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you, all of you, for being here. Welcome to the Gathering of Crossroads, and thank you for welcoming me to the Gathering of Crossroads. It is always an honor to get to deliver the good news of the Bible, but particularly so in my own neighborhood. I only live a few blocks away here, and love what you're doing, and love to get to share in what you're doing as I can. And love to have you involved in what we're doing, as you like. We are with International Students Incorporated, which is about getting people onto campuses of schools, universities, and colleges where there are international students studying, which means people far away from their homes, often needing help adjusting to culture, often simply lonely because of where they are. We have 350 right now, I think, international students studying at UNC, and if they don't get an invitation, they will never get into an American home, to say nothing of a home of people who follow Jesus. So there's an opportunity right here to connect with students, and if you're interested in doing so, we'd be glad to talk with you about that afterwards. Right now, we have about 75 international students connected with 30 local families. And just friendships, get together to enjoy some time together. And we value that. On Friday evenings, I've been leading a Bible study. We've had, I think, 16 students representing 8 different nations in that Bible study. Boy, if you want the Bible to take on a whole new meaning, do that with people from multiple different cultures and ask their perspectives. This last week, we were looking at this little story in Luke 15 about a father who had 2 sons, and one of them took the money and ran, and the perspective of different cultures on what kind of a father would do that was very biblical and very, boy, I just had the greatest time with those conversations. So I'd be glad to involve you in that further. I'm going to call your attention this morning to really very much a central point of the Bible and of our faith. The good news of the Bible begins with a creator who makes the universe good and meaningful and beautiful from the outset. And then he made people able to communicate with him, able to recognize his goodness, able to understand his truth, able to speak back to him in a trust relationship. But we rejected our life giver, and we chose values that lead to death. And even then, the life giver did not turn from us. He entered into the world that we had broken. He came to experience humanity with us. He entered into our suffering beside us. And he died the death that we deserve. And he took all of our dishonor onto himself, dying in our place. And to prove that that death opened the door to life with him again, he rose from death in real time and a real place. And instead of anger, he spoke to us peace. And he told us to spread the good news that we can enter his eternal life simply by trusting him and following as he leads. So death does not have to be the end of our stories. A life that is good and meaningful and eternal is for all who will trust him for it. And when that truth gets inside us, it changes how we see everything else. It changes how we see the rest of our lives in this broken world. It changes how we see our death. It changes how we see our suffering. It is honest about the tragedies that we still face in this world. But it now sees them as a part of a bigger story in which those tears will one day be wiped away. I've been deeply blessed to have people who walked the challenging journey of this life with me. And I think of family, of course, especially of my wife, Lori. I think of prayer partners, of friends who fund our outreach, of colleagues who share the same compassion for those with cross-cultural challenges, the same desire to see the joy of the Lord spread in our communities. That companionship has ties all the way back to the Bible, because when Jesus calls people to follow him, he calls them to make a difficult journey with him. In fact, he said to his followers, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself. That's something foreign to our culture. And he must take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. And we have that recorded 3 different times in our Bibles. In the 4 Gospels, we repeatedly encounter Jesus' prophecy that he was going to Jerusalem to be rejected and beaten and killed, and on the 3rd day risen. And that part of the story is vital to us. We're on a difficult journey. It's often hostile to our faith. And the journey is harder because we begin life headed in the wrong direction. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Romans 3 says. So you roll over on a Sunday morning, already wrestling with a body that tells you to sleep in, and emotions that tell you that your life is too messed up to pretend to have faith, and a spiritual enemy who tells you that it's not going to do any good anyway. And under those conditions, we want a message that makes us feel good. But we also need a message that's truthful about the hard realities we live in. And the Bible is the truth about all tragedy. It speaks to the storms both inside of us and outside of us. Frederick Buechner wrote a little book called Telling the Truth, which has really shaped my thinking, and I'm going to quote it a lot this week and next. And in the first few pages, he says, not only do you live in a world, but a world lives in you. A world of conflict, a world of hidden realities, and a past that you would rather keep in the past, and sins that you don't know how to confess, and wounds that may never be fully healed outside of eternity. So if we're going to profess the gospel, the good news of God's word, if we're going to find it relevant, we have to hear the part that speaks to this dark world inside of us. And perhaps even before we hear that part about the great kingdom that overcomes this broken world. The message must speak not only to the public gathering of polite, orderly people, but also to the private worlds of churning, hurting, fallen souls like you and me, the world of our dreams and our nightmares. It must deliver good news not just to find successful people who are already good, but to us real people who struggle with pride and hostility and greed and lust and things that cripple us more than slipped discs or torn tendons. If we are to experience the amazing reality of grace, it must speak to the realities of wretches like me who have been lost and blind. Before we see the comedy of the gospel, we must know the tragedy of the gospel. And I use those 2 terms here in the classical sense. In ancient theater, a tragedy is a story in which everything goes wrong, out of control. A comedy is a story which ends well. In other words, the content of the play may not be different between the tragedies and the comedies. What sets them apart is how the story ends. The gospel is both. And next week, I'm going to call your attention, Lord willing, to the good ending. But first today, we're going to acknowledge the tragedy. As Buechner says, the gospel is bad news before it's good news. It doesn't pretend that things are better than they really are. It acknowledges this formless chaos inside of us. It begins by reminding us that we've sinned and we've rejected the glory of our Creator, that each of us personally is evil in the imaginations of our hearts, deceitful, desperately corrupted, and when we look into our mirrors, we can't hide the inconsistency, the weaknesses, the loneliness. And that's not the end of the story. Thank God. There is good news. You are loved. You are richly valued, you are sacrificed for, you are forgiven, And that good news is amazing because you know what you have been really. You realize how good the good news is only if you acknowledge how bad the bad news really is. And it's in the context of pain and failure and death of a vision that truth surprises us. It catches us unawares. It turns our sorrow into laughter. There's a side of the gospel that's comedy, but not without the tragedy first. There is a resurrection, but not without a death first. So this morning, I ask you not to do our standard verse-by-verse Bible study, but to journey with me back in time into a conversation. It's in John's Gospel, chapters 18 and 19, and into an event where one man asks a question for us all, and another man dies for us all. So let's fix our eyes on the man with the answer. Before the comedy arrives in person, the tragedy culminates in a person who's pursued by a paranoid king from his birth, a person who's rejected by his family and his followers, a man of sorrows who's well acquainted with grief. And he's seized at night while he's praying. And he's brought before a court, and he is accused, and he is mocked and spat upon and slapped around. He's taken before the Roman governor so that his accusers can demand his execution. And Buechner describes the kind of things that Pilate, the Roman governor, was dealing with, perhaps when Jesus was brought before him. He says, the tax people come in full of the usual excuses. You can't get blood out of a stone, they say, and you can't make a Roman silk purse out of the ear of a Jewish sow. A man comes in with a scheme for an aqueduct to solve the city's water problem. It will pass through land which he is prepared to sell at a considerable personal sacrifice. There's some kind of epidemic in the old slave district. There are complaints about bodies left in the streets to draw flies and packs of orphaned children scavenging among them for food. There's been some kind of demonstration at one of the city gates with some upcountry messiah at the center of it, and the question is how to handle it without making it worse. The Jews are playing it safe by passing the buck to Caesar, and there is no God, and Caesar is his name. Pilate permits himself to say this time, but only to his secretary because she is young and pretty and stupid and won't get it anyway. He says he will see the man himself if that's what they want. If they want him to see their God, he will see him too, the more the merrier. And the man stands in front of the desk with his hands tied behind his back, and you can see that he's been roughed up. His upper lip is absurdly puffed out, one eye is swollen shut, he looks unwashed, he smells unwashed, his feet are bare, big, flat peasant feet. There's something almost comic about the way he stands there, bent slightly forward because of the way his hands are tied, and goggling down at the floor through his one good eye as if he was looking for something that he had lost. If there were just the two of them, Pilate thinks, he would give him his car fare and send him back to the sticks where he came from. But the guards are watching, and on the wall, an official portrait of Tiberius Caesar is watching. The fat, powdered face, the toothy imperial smile. So he goes through the formalities. So, you're the king of the Jews, he says. The head Jew, because there hasn't been one of them yet who hasn't made this claim. David come back to give Judea back to the Jews. And the man says, it's not this world that I'm king of. But his accent is so thick that Pilate hardly gets it. The accent together with what they have done to his upper lip, as if he has a mouthful of stones, he says, I've come to bear witness to the truth. And then Pilate, the governor, asks a question. And he asks it in part because he would give his life to know the answer, and in part cynically because he believes there isn't an answer. And the question is, what is truth? And that's the question for all of us, isn't it? What's truth? Jesus doesn't answer because sometimes mere words cannot contain the whole truth. Sometimes reality has to be experienced. Sometimes it must be observed for generations and across centuries of history before we realize what the truth is. Sometimes mere words cannot describe it, so that if words are used at all, they must be poetic, full of intense feelings and shocking images, the breathtaking poetry of Isaiah and the heartbreaking poetry of Hosea and the despairing poetry of Jeremiah. Because the daily news cannot describe the tragedy of an anguished heart, nor the fantastic realities beyond a defeated culture, nor the awesome transactions taking place in the heavens, even while tiny mortals hate and conspire and fear and flee and capitulate and condemn. Sometimes a word accomplishes nothing unless it's a living word, spoken with action and not merely sound, and made known in passion and agony and death. What is truth? Jesus does not answer in the way that we want him to. He does answer in the way we need, whether we know it or not. He answers in receiving our stripes, in carrying our cross, in becoming our sin. As 2 Corinthians 5 puts it, in dying our death. We want a trivial word spoken in a narrow moment because that's the way we think, but he will not speak a trivial word. He will thunder profound realities, beginning with plunging himself into our agony and drinking in our depravity. A trivial word is too small a thing for him to speak. He speaks by living a visible, tangible tragedy. When we are in anguish, we cry out for a word. We want an explanation. Why? We scream for truth, and truth seems silent, not because it doesn't exist, but because truth is more profound than words can always teach us. The poet reveals it in Psalm 46. In the midst of the earth giving way and mountains falling into the sea and roaring waters and quaking earth, nations in uproar, kingdoms collapsing, broken bows, shattered spears, flaming chariots, the Lord speaks in silence. Be silent and know that I am God. The Lord Almighty is with us. And so that psalm is prophetic, written 1,000 years before Jesus fulfilled it. He is with us. He is in Jerusalem, standing before Pilate with a split lip and a crowd outside demanding his execution. He's present as Pilate asks the question for all of us, what is truth? And he answers with silence, not because there is no answer, but because in his silence he is profoundly with us. And in that same silence, he will bear eternal anguish for us. He is silent not because truth is not being spoken, but because part of the truth is tragedy that must be experienced before salvation can be realized and loved. And in the loud silence of tragedy, there's mystery. Mystery in the biblical sense. Mystery not because there is no answer, but mystery in that something profound is still hidden to those who do not yet have eyes to see and ears to hear. The loud truth that is in the silence. A heavy symphony is playing. The least mature hears only a tune. Those who listen more intently hear harmonies, and then a whole spectrum of colors of sound. And those who have listened long hear tension and passion and resolution. Those with ears to hear recognize a story, its tragedy and climax and victory and celebration. Truth that is grander than one listener's petty squeaks, and truth that is more profound than can be contained in one simple phrase. Truth is here, not in the trite jingle of a car commercial, but it's the fabric of a symphonic epic which demands more of the listener if you would know the truth. We recognize brilliance in the comedy of Shakespeare because we've learned integrity in the tragedies of Shakespeare. The characters are profound because the characters revealed are real people. Like you and me, people tossed violently by the storms outside of us and maybe even more so by the storms inside of us. Sometimes prophets and priests dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious, the Lord cried through Jeremiah. A preacher who has the chronological advantage, who has been blessed to endure some storms, knows the congregation is not made up of cardboard people whose tragedies are so trivial as to be answered by bumper sticker slogans and religious band-aids. That's a paraphrase of what Jeremiah said. I have met with the young man with suicidal thoughts because of a rejected relationship. The college student whose parents are opposed to his faith. The boy who thought he was doomed to a life of homosexuality. The woman whose husband would not allow her to attend worship. The young woman who has been sexually abused. The man who cannot control the drugs that control him. The woman who impoverished her family through a gambling addiction. The man whose wife long ago disappeared behind a veil of Alzheimer's. The teenager systematically despised by peers. The victims of cruel legalism within the church. The young woman whose husband died in their first year of marriage. The mother whose 6-year-old son has brain cancer. The man who fears that his divorce will make him a social outcast. And to these people living the tragedy, the world holds out answers. Religion, learning how to act, is an answer. The Republicans are an answer, and the Democrats are another answer. Food is an answer. Dieting is an answer. Chiropractic is an answer. Transcendental meditation is an answer. Sex with more and different people is an answer. Alcohol and drugs are answers. Mindless television is an answer. Sports clubs and music and dance lessons and fun drives are answers. Clubbing is an answer. A better car or house or job or spouse is an answer. But none of the answers prevent the tragedy, nor are they honest about the real need, about the seriousness of the wound that the Bible repeatedly speaks to. In the tragedies, we ask questions that don't come up at other times. And that in itself is significant, isn't it? What is truth? Truth is a sinless man standing before a crowd screaming for his death. Truth is gawkers insulting him as he staggers along the Via Dolorosa, carrying the beam upon which he's going to be killed. Truth is that man dying between two thieves. We want to fast forward to Sunday, avoid the tragic part, skip over that Friday thing. But don't ignore that tragedy. Truth is there. Real life is there. Redemption is there. Because he is there in person. Where power mongers conspire and common folks wish murder, where a mother weeps for a dying son and criminals swear and people go on about their business as the Holy One is crushed under the weight of their sin. And as he hangs there, he cries out the ancient psalm, "My God, why? Why have you forsaken me?" Because the Bible has been honest all along about times of tragedy. Take a look at Adam and Eve, the founders of tragedy. Abraham and Sarah and Joseph and David and Job and Jeremiah. Take a look at Hebrews chapter 11, a whole hall of fame of the suffering. Or look at Revelation 7, the souls of those who suffered the worst that this world could throw at them before the throne of God. Good Friday can be called good only because of what happened after the horrific tragedy that it was. Of course, because this tragedy, his tragedy, has a surprise ending, well, that changes the whole story. Because his story is the story of redemption through tragedy. It means tragedy is not the final tragedy, not his and not mine and not yours. If we can see the glory of God in that sinless man on the cross, that public figure betrayed and arrested and accused and denied and mocked and beaten and brutalized and crucified and risen. If you can see salvation in that, then you know that nothing in your experience or mine is beyond the reach of God's glory. And we find ourselves singing on a Sunday morning about a glorious cross. What is truth? His answer is not in words alone, but in the ultimate tragedy, in the ultimate redemption story, in the real flesh and real blood and real agony and real death for real people in real circumstances like yours and mine. Nothing in your past or your present or your future can obliterate the very real, tangible accomplishment of that Good Friday. That's at the heart of what trusting him means.